I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. Each week it's my privilege to bring you guests that teach all of us about the environment, what's happening to it, what should be happening to it, and what you can do about it if you don't like what's happening to it. At least once a year I try to get Pat Durkin on the show because Pat knows more about deer and deer in Wisconsin than anybody I know, and he kind of cuts through the fluff and gets down to the important things. Deer are important to Wisconsin, but I'm not going to steal any of Pat's speech because I can't. Pat is a writer. He writes for many publications. Those of you who read the Oshkosh Northwestern get to see his column every Sunday. The Wisconsin State Journal publishes him every Sunday. I read him very, very carefully, and I pay attention. You're about to find out why. Welcome to the show, Pat.
Nice to see you again, George.
Well, I don't want to be limited in this show to deer, but deer are important. In Wisconsin, especially important, and people are within moments of the completion of the annual Wisconsin hunting season talking about the deer problem. Do we have a problem, and what is it?
Well, we have lots of deer problems. Just depends on your perspective on what the problem is. You know, you talk to some deer hunters, hunting areas up north that are right now hurting for deer. There's definitely a problem up there. And then we have problems down in southern Wisconsin, the southern two-thirds of Wisconsin, where in many areas we have too many deer to the point where we actually are losing deer in the winter some years now through winter starvation, which we never had in farm country until recently. Then you get down in the southwestern corner of the state and south central part of the state, and we have chronic wasting disease. So yeah, there's problems there too. And I'm just this morning when I was leaving my house from Wapaka, I looked in my yard and saw deer tracks everywhere, and I have to cover up all my shrubs every winter if I want to see them in the spring, because the deer come in there and chew everything off. So, but with that problem though comes a lot of great recreation, a lot of great wildlife viewing. They're a splendid animal. Give lots of great recreation for hunters, and I still love it. I never get tired of talking about deer.
Deer are important in Wisconsin.
Oh, big time. A lot of times we try to tie things to, put an economic value on things, and the one you see kicked around for Wisconsin deer hunting and its economic impact on business is, they're pretty close to $1.5 billion they figure in Wisconsin. And then you get into some of these great rural economic studies that people do, like at the university. And the one estimate I saw recently was that hunters, when you actually get into the hunters and what they see as the most valuable parts of their life, and start adding that up, and the one estimate I saw it was from 10 years ago, put the Wisconsin recreational value at $8 billion for our deer hunting in Wisconsin. So hunters really value that. So it's a big thing to talk about and a big thing to not take for granted.
Well, it's a big resource, the way you have described it, and I know that from my personal experience. And of course, like any other resource, it has to be managed, where we have too many deer in one spot, too few deer in another spot, and that means unhappy hunters, unhappy farmers, unhappy insurance companies.
Yeah, well, one thing I say with all affection is that deer make people stupid. We get too emotional about. We don't often take just a step back and say, how do other people view this? You talk to a wildlife manager, and they're trying to deal with people who look to deer hunting for so many things, and they want deer there every year. And then when you ask them to manage the herd, it actually means taking down the herd in most cases. Well, then you telling these hunters to take down something they like seeing. They like to see lots of deer, and unfortunately, though, I think a lot of deer hunters don't think about what's going on with that herd the rest of the year when they're not out there in the woods, and whether it's causing crop damage, whether it's eating some of these bushes like mine, all those kind of things come into play that I think as a society we have to learn to understand why some people see that resource differently than we do.
And of course, it's a whole different problem when you get north of Highway 10 than it is south of Highway 10. And I get calls from friends up north where I was raised and formerly hunted, and was very lucky if I could see 3 white tails in a 9-day season. And now I'm down in the farm country where if I haven't seen a deer in an hour, I think, well, maybe I ought to go in the house and have a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
It's a whole different problem. And the management challenges are really quite different. These people who hunt up north are, of course, blaming wolves and blaming the DNR, of course.
Of course, and our situation with deer in Wisconsin has really flipped in our lifetime. When I was a kid, back in the late 50s, early 60s, there weren't many deer in southern Wisconsin. Most guys still went north to hunt deer, but you think all you gotta do is go back to habitat. What habitat supports deer the best? Well, back then we were still coming off the logging era. The habitat north was still pretty good for deer, and we had a lot of deer. Habitat down south had basically been cleaned off, been wiped out by the rapid expansion of farming. Well, now it's all kind of leveled out again, and now we have this really mature forest that can't support many deer up north. And you throw the wolves into the situation. Well, everyone wants to blame the wolves, but I often say that that you can't force something to live where it can't survive, and if it can't find food, they can't survive. And the more we learn about the predator-prey relationships too, is that the more we really realize that it's really the number of prey that determine how many predators we have. It's not the other way around.
Well, the biggest predator, of course, is man.
Yeah.
And the biggest tool for managing deer is a hunting season. And the DNR has certainly played with that over the years. So we have so many hunting seasons. I need a chart.
Yeah.
When we take our next break, we'll come back and you can talk about those because you might understand them.
I'll try.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. Pat Durkin and I are talking about your deer. Your deer are managed by the DNR. The DNR is managed by the government in Madison. Maybe I should have said mismanagement. That has made a big difference. It is no longer managed by scientists. Now that's my opinion. Let's get Pat's.
Going back, 22 years, things don't always move fast in government, and a lot of times, we know that from reading our history that's the way it's supposed to work. But then 22 years ago, our governor at the time took away the DNR's secretary's job as far as being a citizen board being appointed by, and made it a governor's appointee. So now politically, we have a lot more political involvement in deer hunting, fish management, all these kind of things get a lot more direct political pressure now. And I think it's really taken off and gotten a lot more political in the last 6-7 years since Scott Walker took over. He's been a lot more aggressive about how the DNR should be operated. Our DNR secretary, Kathy Stepp, openly says that she thinks that when they appear in front of the legislature, their staff appears, they basically do not offer position statements on what they think the DNR should be doing. They take their direction from the legislature. So you have a lot more direct involvement now, and some people say, well, that's good because the politicians are elected by people and they should be able to apply pressure. But I think we've seen in the last few years here that they're cutting the DNR, they're cutting science, they cut a lot of scientific positions, and so to me, I think I have to agree with you. I think it's been a lot more politically motivated, not scientifically driven, and so the only time you see now is when they invoke science is something they agree with.
Well, everybody knows that it's not good for the deer to feed them through the winter, and yet legislative pressure from northern legislators have allowed deer feeding and deer baiting. Everybody knows deer baiting isn't good for the sportsman, the deer, or the sport. Again, that isn't science. As you indicated, the DNR has cut back on the number of scientists, and it seems like the decisions are a political popularity contest, which leads me to my next subject. One of the biggest threats to our deer herd in the state of Wisconsin and nationally is CWD. Now, back a few years ago, it appeared to me that it was limited to a couple of counties near Dane County, Madison, and I don't think the state's done much about it. Now it's a threat in all 72 counties, or am I wrong?
Well, it's not a threat right now in all 72, but then again, one thing I keep harping on is we have not done another statewide comprehensive test results of during deer season to see really where is this present and where is it not present. And the sampling we're doing now in southern Wisconsin isn't being scientifically modeled to get a nice representative sample and make sure we know exactly what the densities are in that disease. And you have, it's been really random as far as who turns in deer for testing. There's no mandatory testing down there. And so it's really a hodgepodge of results. And so when people say, well, we don't have CWD in our area, well, we don't. You probably don't in some of these areas outside that area, but we don't know for certain. And it brings up concerns where, people now, when you have an area like in southern Wisconsin where of the deer being tested for it, it's over 10% are testing positive. And then we get in all these discussions about, well, is that really, how do we know it's 10% if it's not being scientifically driven in it? And I think exactly my point. If it's not being scientifically designed and modeled and people aren't being told they have to bring it in and get it tested, how do you know for certain what you have down there?
It's never been cured as far as my reading.
Right.
And recently there have been some efforts to develop some inoculations which haven't worked.
Right.
Other states have had the problem and continue to have it. It is sometimes traced to game farms where you have too big a concentration of animals where they're eating and eliminating at the same spot. But how big a problem is it? What kind of a threat is it to our deer herd?
Well, to me, I have no doubt that because of the way it's been, we've gotten so passive with the way we manage our herd that it might not happen in my lifetime or yours, but we're going to have a problem in the Great Lakes states that we probably can't control. I mean, it probably will take its course because we refuse to really go after it. And I still think if you get aggressive with it, we could do a better job of controlling it. And I looked on. The big thing is so many people throw up their hands and say, well, we can't do anything about it. Well, we haven't really tried to do anything about it. So how can you say we can't do anything about it? There are people out there who have looked at this real seriously and said, if we can find a submarine in the bottom of the ocean that blew up back in the 1960s without any knowledge of where that thing went down, but you start putting your best minds to work on this thing, you can start targeting where the problem areas are, the most problematic areas. You can go in there and target those areas, knock that herd down in those areas, knock out the deer that are probably most likely to carry the disease. And the whole thing is, if you can start tipping that where you're removing more sick deer, the new sick deer are popping up, you can start making a difference. But we have not tried to do that. We have basically just kind of let the hunting community say that well, we can't do anything about it, so let's enjoy ourselves while we can. And I don't think that's a good way to look at this.
Well, one thing we know for sure is if we eliminate the intense, heavy overpopulation concentration of deer, there's less recidivism of CWD. Am I correct?
Well, there's some arguments that density of the deer isn't what drives this, that it's more of how the number of times they interact. But I still think, well, how do you control their interactions? You can't do that. So you're basically left with, trying to control the population. But, as I was saying before, there are areas we know for a fact, if you want to start really studying this, there are areas with worse problems than others. And then typically we know too that the bucks are more likely to carry it than the does. So you should be targeting these bucks and targeting bucks of all ages, whether the young bucks, especially the yearling buck age group that moves off in the new areas. They disperse from their home area. Those are the ones that start moving that disease around more. So we should be targeting the yearling bucks too. And hunters don't like to do that.
No, they don't. And of course, too few deer in the north, that's a problem. Too many deer in the south with concentrations that could prove to be a bigger problem. We need scientific management.
Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. It has to be scientifically driven. And when you have the politics involved the way we do right now, we're not allowing the science to come in and give us our best hope for this. And yes, science isn't perfect. We learn all the time that what we thought 10 years ago isn't true today, but that's part of the scientific process. We learn as we go, we adapt, put the new information to work and learn some more. And you'll always be making mistakes, of course, when you're managing, but I think it's a process, it's a system. That's better than this throw up your hands and give up approach that some people want to take. And I still think the science eventually will prevail. So I hope it does anyway.
We're out of time. Patrick Durkin,
Great talking to you.
It's not noticeable, but I'm always smarter after you've been on the show, and I want to thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The management of our natural resources is very important in this state. It's the responsibility of the Department of Natural Resources. Unfortunately, the Department of Natural Resources is really being run by the governor and legislators, and so decisions are made based on votes and not science. You can see the results. The results are bad. They're going to get worse. I want you to put some pressure on the politicians that listen to you. Give the responsibility back to the scientists. That's my opinion. I'm George Curtis.